Welcome, my listening friends, to the DeFi Collective with your hosts, Robert Vaughn and Alex Jewell. The DeFi Collective on Let's Talk Radio is a platform where we discuss everything that has to do with decentralized finance. It may be algorithms, it may be surveillance capitalism, it might be Twitter. Today, we're going to talk about Facebook, which is a social media company. And the DeFi Collective likes to explore things that people have requested that we explore. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Facebook. Facebook has been in the news a lot lately about how they operate and what that means to you, and how it affects you. Because, when you tell somebody something that's fascinating, they always say, well, what does that mean to me? How does that affect me? What's in it for me? Well, we're going to let you know what's in it for you in terms of social media with a focus on Facebook. We are the DeFi Collective, and you can find us at the DeFi Collective on Let's Talk Radio, radio with a Y, RADYO, on YouTube, and we also broadcast on Facebook Live. Our email address is the DeFiCollective@gmail.com. And please reach out to us if there are any subjects that you're interested in, you want to talk about, and we'll certainly try to get you some answers and have a pretty spirited conversation. Well, let's get started. Facebook, where do you start with Facebook? Facebook is a social media platform that's used by almost 90% of the people in this country and almost 76% of the people worldwide who have access to social media. Now, there's some countries who have banned Facebook because they did not believe it was in the best interest of their government to have Facebook in the country. I think one is China. I would imagine it's probably pretty hard to get Facebook in China. You can probably get it in Russia now, I think. I know at one time you couldn't, and then you could, so I don't know where that stands. But Facebook has a worldwide influence, and it's not just, the things that we talk about and discuss aren't just things that happen here. They're things that happen worldwide. For instance, Facebook, we talked before about data acquisition, companies that acquire your data and monetize it and sell it for profit. Because advertising has gotten to the point now where not only can they sell you something and suggest that you buy something, but they can actually influence the way you feel about a certain item when you see it. Whether you feel good, whether you feel bad, and they do this through the use of algorithms and with your data. For instance, there was a gentleman on 60 Minutes this past Sunday that does work with he's an Israeli, and he does work with the government. He has a company, and he said that his company could tell who was going to be gay before they actually knew it. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty scary when you think about it, but they've actually done some experiments, and they can tell by, the post and the data that you generate, and they can pretty tell if someone's going to be gay, which might not be a big deal in some countries. But could you imagine living in Russia or China? That might not go over too good. Right. So that's just one instance of the type of things that they can project, and they can not just predict, but they can predict with pretty much certainty, and with the acquisition of your data. So I'm going to let Alex talk a little bit about Facebook and some of the implications that it has for our society and our government, and you as an individual, because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And, a lot of these tech companies too, because they are data centers and they've monetized their data. And we've especially seen this with companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon, of course. They create ecosystems, right? So, recently with Facebook coming out with Meta, renaming their parent company Meta, it's the same thing that Google did. Google created a parent company called Alphabet so they could start separating themselves from the platform and creating an ecosystem of apps, right? And that's ultimately what Google succeeded at, to kind of avoid the monopoly attack, or the attack on their monopoly. And Facebook's done the same thing. And when you think about Facebook's ecosystem and how it affects us, not just on Facebook, but across the web, that can be really concerning. You think about Facebook in terms of the metaverse of where they're going, and that could be even more concerning because Facebook has all of our family information and our history on Facebook. They have all of our daily behaviors, where we go, what we're taking pictures of.
Our medical information.
Hmm?
Our medical information.
Yeah, they have medical information, but everything you share on Instagram is also another storage of data. They have all of your conversations from Facebook Messenger to WhatsApp. They have all of your 3D experiences, your VR and AR with Oculus. And they also have agreements with Google to coordinate with Google searching to associate it with your Open Graph profile. They also have agreements with advertisers across the web because their whole business model is advertising. And so no matter where you go on the internet, that information is going back to your profile and being associated with you and your digital presence. And that includes everything that you do. I mean, today, I couldn't believe this. We have like a security company that we use at work that gives us like little videos that we watch and we answer questions, and it just like makes sure that we're understanding security principles of how to be secure with our data. This is so ironic because I watched the video, I answered the questions, and I went over to Facebook on my phone and I had an ad for the security company that we use for those quizzes.
That's crazy, man. Yeah.
I mean, it was like so funny because here's this company that exists to tell us how to be better with our data and more secure with our data, mostly to avoid hackers and things like that. But then even that wasn't safe. Even that wasn't sacred from Facebook somehow knowing that I had accessed that website and taken that quiz for work. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality of the situation we're in, right? Because it's a data standard, like we've talked about before, where it's not just monetization of data, it's monetization of the data. Like the data has become the underlying standardization for currency, right? It's a currency of data. And when you are using these ecosystems, these families of apps that all communicate with each other for different aspects of your life, and there's nothing that is sacred anymore, right? We've talked about just walking through the city anymore. Wherever you're walking, there's data being collected on that location and where you are and what you're passing and what apps are on your phone. And so, it's that's really some of it, right? And that's why Facebook is rebranding, especially as Meta, because in the metaverse, when we do start blurring those lines between digital and physical even more, they want to own that too. They see the trend of decentralization of the metaverse, and if Facebook can own that ecosystem of the next internet, of that decentralized web, and they can centralize some form of manipulation or influence on that experience, they're already starting to do it, which shows us it's going to be the next frontier, right? That this is going to be the next important thing that we have to fight for.
Right. Plus, I think Facebook can see the handwriting on the wall.
Right.
There's some legislation coming down the pike. There is even talk of maybe breaking Facebook up.
That's what Meta protects them from. It's the same thing Google did, because Google before Alphabet was under the same scrutiny, and Google's like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll create Alphabet. Everything will end up owned by Alphabet, right?
Yeah. And keep in mind too, that this is just not here in this country. This is worldwide. Cambridge Analytica, the company that got Trump elected, the data company, got their data from Facebook. And they said, well, if you give us this data, we won't do anything with it. We'll just want to study it. And well, they used it. They also were very influential in getting Brexit passed in the UK. And now people are like, wow, I don't know if this was such a good idea to break away from Europe, data acquisition and data analytics, surveillance capitalism is a whole new realm of the economy or of monetization, because what's being monetized is your personal experience. If you have, if Alex's girlfriend likes this brown leather jacket and her birthday, and she's thinking about getting it for her birthday, well, all he has to do is Google it one time, and he's gonna start, the process, because they know when Alex gets paid, because they have access to that, which is no big deal. I mean, if you got a bank account, that information is not as private as you might think. They know Alex gets paid. They know his girlfriend's birthday is Saturday, and they know that he's going to be near the mall on Saturday. So it doesn't take a whole lot to get him in that mall and buying that jacket. For instance, if he goes near the mall, and this is geo mapping, when you become in proximity of something that somebody wants to sell you, then you may get a coupon. And I tried an experiment. If you want to try it, you can try it too. If you go in Target and you go in the parking lot far away from the store, and you Google the price of something and make a picture of it, and then you go in the store and you Google that same item, the item in the store always costs more.
Right.
Because they know that you're in the store.
Right.
So they don't have to give you a discount to get you in the store. And my wife told me about that. She'll go Google something at home or in parking lot or wherever, and she'll get one price. And she just noticed that a couple of times because she shops there a lot. And she said, it's funny because when I go in Target and I look for the coupon, I can't find the coupon,
Right.
But if I go outside to the car, and I can find a coupon. So I think, when we say Facebook, we mean Facebook, the company, but we're also speaking sometimes in broader terms of all social media companies. But I think
right, it's unprecedented, right? There is an entire system here, and we've done a whole episode on surveillance capitalism. But the way that Zuboff describes it is that it unilaterally claims human experience as free raw material for translation into human behavior, right? So it translates your data into them actually. I think she says it is no longer enough to automate information flows about us. The goal now is to automate us, right? And that's like a big deal. That's a bigger deal than advertising customly to people's interests. That's manipulating human behavior because you've understood so much data about human behavior based on whatever properties, and you can write programs that automate around that. And that's where we run into issues, right? It's, we talked about Pokemon Go before, but that's something that create purchase, right? It caused purchasing behavior, but purchasing behavior is not the only behavior. And so when you allow any advertisers to use those tools on your platform, because that's your business model, like Facebook's, then they can manipulate human behavior for other agendas. And this is where we run into serious ethical concerns. Obviously, there's ethical concerns around forcing people to buy things without full consent, right? But manipulating human behavior is an ethical question around purchasing. But the bigger ethical question is when you manipulate human behavior around politics, right? When we've talked about Obama's 2012 victory, Zuboff described it as the capture and analysis of behavioral surplus as political methodology. In other words, they use the behavioral data of human beings to win the election. And obviously Trump did to an extent with Cambridge Analytica, where it was illegal.
That's why Obama told Joe Walsh when they were in the House, and Joe Walsh said, "You lie." And Obama kind of looked at me and said, "Well, I got elected twice." He said, "If I ran again," he said, "I'd get elected again." Because what he was using, nobody had used up until that point. And then Trump came along and said, "Okay, this is a pretty clever idea."
Right. And there were companies that built up being able to just provide that kind of service, right? That worked within Facebook's Open Graph protocol, where Facebook had APIs that you could get approved to use as an advertiser. I could sign up as an advertiser and I could use those tools, those knobs and buttons that impact your behavior. If I have enough money, I can impact a certain category of people around me in Chicago to do a certain thing simply using Facebook advertising. Like when you think about the implications of that, I mean, that's very simplified. But when you think about the implications of that from a democratic standpoint, is that democracy anymore, right? Or is that some technocratic dystopia?
Right.
And that's the real concern, especially as Facebook sets their sights on the next internet with metaverse.
Yeah, and see, social media is not just a place where you make friends. It's an instrument of political change. And this was demonstrated in 2010, where they had what's called the Arab Spring, when they had a lot of the Middle Eastern Arab countries had all these uprisings. And that took place, the communication platform that they used was Facebook.
Yep.
And Facebook also used that as a contagion experiment to see how they could transfer Alex's opinion to me and make me feel the same way Alex does. And this is done through your feed. This is done through what pops up in your feed. Sometimes things will pop up in your feed and they'll just really piss you off, and
Right.
and those are the things that people react to. For instance, what's called the recommendation algorithms for Facebook, when they say, well, what can we send Alex to increase his engagement? Because then we can charge more for advertising, because we know Alex will look at this 3 times.
Right.
Well, false news stories, it turn to find out, spread 6 times faster than real news. And that's because that's the way the engagement algorithm is set up.
Yeah.
That like they were saying that there were like 12 people on Facebook who were responsible for 98% of all the false information regarding vaccines.
Right. Propaganda
So,
does better, right? Propaganda and conspiracy has a more extreme reaction, and more extreme reactions keep you glued to it longer. It's not Facebook trying to encourage conspiracy. They're not. Their agenda is very simple. It's make money. That's it. It's
regardless of the cost.
Keep their influence in terms of financial gain, right? In terms of market share, in terms of like with the competition of all these apps, how long can we keep people so that our advertisers are staying with us and that we're continuing to grow and meet certain metrics and goals that our investors continually set for us, right? That's Facebook's goal. Now, the problem is that when you automate how you do that, when you are no longer having human decisions and it's strictly computer logic gate decisions, then look at it this way. You have a piece of propaganda or some sort of conspiracy theory that ignites a lot of debate and people are glued to it. They get riled up. They have emotional reactions, visceral reactions, or excited reactions. Mm-hmm. They're going to stay with that longer. Or if you have something, I don't know, just a picture of a lunch or something, that's not going to do as well, right? And it's not because there's a human being there who's like, well, let's pick this. No, it's a computer, a system, it's a neural network that over time learns that this keeps them there longer because its only goal is to keep them there longer, right? And the more that this happens, the more that the human discourse, the public discourse, and the public opinion in these echo chambers devolves, the more it becomes like the content that does better, which is excitable and performative and propaganda ridden. And the people boosting these agendas, certain politicians, certain interest groups, they know that. It's a field day for them. I mean, you think 50 years ago, conspiracy theories were kind of niche, right? They're kind of fringe. You like knew that one uncle or something that thought stuff was weird, and there was lizard people running the government. But now it's like not just the one uncle. Now you're like looking for the uncle who like doesn't believe that stuff, right? Like there's families that have been completely people with otherwise normal careers and lives who have fallen into rabbit holes like QAnon, despite the logic, despite the not even being able to process.
But I think it's they live in a world, and this is why I think paying attention to the metaverse is so important, because a lot of people say, well, that's just virtual reality, it's blah 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 blah. But see, a lot of people live in places that don't agree with reality in terms of what information they get.
Right.
Like, most people would say, well, Hillary Clinton eats babies in the basement of a pizza shop in
Right.
New York or something.
DC, yeah.
And you would hear that and you'd say, wow, that is pretty far out,
Right.
But there was actually a guy that went to the pizza shop
They went there.
with a weapon to kill her.
There's people today that still believe that.
I still believe that,
Yeah.
And if you live in a world where you get inundated with this all the time, and every time you turn on your computer or your phone or your TV, I mean, that's all you see. Well, that leads you to an extreme position.
Right.
That's just like if you look at what happened January 6th. I mean, I won't go so far as to say it wasn't their fault, but a lot of them wound up in extreme positions.
Right.
And we talked about this earlier about Black Lives Matter having Black Lives Matter rallies with 100,000 people in countries where there weren't even Black people. And you say, well, what are you protesting? George Floyd. I'm like, right. You're in New Zealand, So yeah. I think, once we understand, that, these algorithms, this is a worldwide thing. These recommendation algorithms aren't just happening in this country, they're happening all over the world. And that's why you see, somebody was saying a couple of weeks ago, I got an email, somebody said, well, how do you explain this kind of like shift to the right? And it's happening all around the world,
History explains it because it's not the first time.
It's not the first time, yeah. And see what happens with social media, it doesn't create it, but it exacerbates it.
Right.
And it happens a lot faster and it's much more intense.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about, you think about January 6th, you said that people tried to overthrow the government. I mean, just think about that for a second. They went to stop the orderly transfer of power, which, in this country is kind of like unheard of.
Right.
But they've done this in other countries and they've been successful.
And amazingly, the propaganda has shifted a lot of mindsets to people to be able to convince people not even to believe that it was their people there. Like, yeah. I mean, that's the amazing thing, is that it can create events like that. Yeah. And then after the fact, change the narrative on what the event was, right? And I think that's amazing, the effect that this has on reality of, of people who truly believe that, like, when certain leaders are talking, that they're talking to them, like the lucky number 17 for QAnon, where they believe that the number 17 is some magical like message to them, and that Trump's speaking to them. One time he said, like, before he was president, he had maybe been to DC like 17 times. And they were like, 17 times? That's the number. That's
he's one of us.
And all of a sudden it like it gave them like vitality, and perhaps, I don't know, maybe he did know, Mitt Romney certainly knows at this point that he's been feeding into the QAnon conspiracy theories, even quoting their phrases, when we go all, we go one, when we go one, we go all, or something like that. I mean, these leaders know, but it fits their agenda, right? There's an agenda on the corporate side of money and maintaining business metrics. And then there's this agenda, and the main agenda on the side of politicians who just want to get reelected, right? That's like their whole deal. The whole cycle is, how do I get reelected? How do I get reelected? How do I ignite excitement in a base? And when they have something on a silver platter like QAnon to use, it's done. It's a done deal, right? They're on the right side fighting to save children from the sewers. I mean, do it, and it just works off of each other until you end up in this shift in a complete political direction because of those echo chambers. I saw an interview with a supporter of Bernie Sanders, a Bernie Sanders supporter who had fallen into QAnon. I mean, this was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. a leftist who had fallen into conspiracy theories of QAnon, but just didn't believe that, like, the Q person was on the right. Like, they had like their own set of theories because it was so compelling.
The Q person was really a progressive. Is that what he was saying?
That's what they truly believed, that it was a progressive, and the other people just didn't get it because it was the stories of I mean, it's a similar story, right? We've talked about this before, where left and right are kind of upset about the same thing, of this like elite control and the
Yeah,
centralization.
you ask them, what's your problem? Oh, the government's screwing us,
Right.
and the rich people
The
are not,
the
they're
rich,
not
the
letting
rich are
us
the
make any
problem.
money. Well,
Yeah,
what's
the
your problem?
greed.
The rich people are
Um,
screwing us, and the government's not letting us, so it's just like you said, the same thing. But go ahead,
Right.
I'm
So
sorry. Yeah.
QAnon fit with that, right? QAnon fits with, well, it's taking a step further, but it's saying, I don't trust those people in power. They're definitely in a satanic cabal and sacrificing children that take their adrenal glands and whatever, all this other stuff they believe. I mean, I guess it doesn't actually, most of that doesn't fundamentally disagree with the progressive viewpoint either. It's just as compelling to a person who wants to belong to that change, right? And belong to knowing something that somebody else doesn't.
Yeah. And you can get inundated with this stuff. And if you spend your time watching cable TV and social media, you can find yourself in a place where you start to question things and believe things. And then you meet people who are of like mind, and you tend to have a worldview that
Mhm.
maybe doesn't agree with reality, but agrees with the reality of you've created for yourself.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but one of the uh, results of Facebook updates, during the pandemic, or during the pandemic, when everybody was locked down last year, um, Facebook and WhatsApp traffic doubled.
Mhm.
So people were even more inundated with social media. And one of the things that they noticed is that this led to a decrease. The pandemic led to a decrease in traditional methods of communication.
Yep.
So instead of us getting together and chopping it up over some coffee or whatever, going to the bar, people would get used to using Facebook and social media. And what happens is I think people forgot how to communicate. Somewhat they got out of
Mhm.
practice in terms of communicate. This is why you see people like airlines. People are like freaking out on airlines all
Yeah.
the time now.
It's like
And
feral people trying to get on planes,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
raised by wolves.
yeah, and then you when you talk to you hear some of these people talk, and you talk to them, and it's like there's no communication. There's like a shield where you don't communicate. And I think that's because a lot of the communication skills have not been used in a while. And I think we're seeing a lot of results of that. There's much more gun violence now. When people try to settle things, it used to be where you try to talk it out, but now it's like, people they're just, okay, I will just blast the whole place.
Yeah. Or
So
neighbors just randomly shooting each other over, like a
yeah,
plant or something. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, plants in my driveway. Yeah, it's 6 inches on my driveway. Oh my God, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So social media, I guess, Facebook, surveillance capitalism is not to be taken lightly, because all indications are it will become even more, entrenched in our society.
Right.
Now, if Facebook is an instrument of social change or political change, I mean, you can only imagine that whoever kind of controls that could have, some outsized influence in terms of our politics.
Yep.
And I think we see that happening. I think it's been happening for a few years, and we see it happening. And Alex and I, we talked about, well, what's the antidote for this? How do you counteract this? And I know one of the things we talked about was decentralized social media. Where you wouldn't necessarily be motivated by advertising dollars, to help your bottom line. Maybe you could come up with another way. Maybe you charge people $1 a month or something to be on it.
Right.
Because what's happening now is they're motivated by advertising dollars. So anything that creates engagement is what they do.
Right.
It's
And
like,
that model's not going to change, right? That's the thing with metaverse.
yeah, it's not
The metaverse for us in the DeFi space has always been a decentralization of that power, of like an ownership, right? We talk a lot about reversal of ownership. And here's Facebook, who's capitalizing on that excitement and that generation. They're capitalizing on the progress there, the direction, in order to actually add more ways to track you. I mean, imagine right now they just track you two-dimensionally, right? They track you obviously three-dimensionally where you're going and things like that, but it's still limited to a physical extent, right? There's still physical limitations. But imagine if they're able to track everything you do in a three-dimensional space of like your eye movements, how long you look at certain things, right? These are things that they could to an extent now, but in a 3D space, there's so many more data points. I mean, it's literally an exponential shift in the data points that they can track on your behavior. And again, the nature of them understanding too much about your behavior is all fodder for them to be able to manipulate that behavior, because their business model isn't going to change. So it's just going to be more behavioral data points to manipulate in order to grow their advertising business, right? Into the three-dimensional space of the metaverse.
Yeah. And a lot of these things sound far-fetched, but the things that we talk about and we tell you about, we encourage you to research them for yourself, and you'll find out that what we're saying is true. For instance, I saw today where Elon Musk is working on an invention where he can implant some sort of integrated circuit in your brain, and you could hear music from the inside out. You could think of songs and you would actually hear the music in your brain without having a radio or without having speakers or anything. And it would just connect directly to your auditory nerves, where you could actually hear music without anybody playing it.
Well, they've showed Neuralink on pigs. I mean, it works. Like, I mean,
yeah, it works. Yeah.
Is it going to fulfill all of their promises right away? No. Most actual neuroscientists at this point are not incredibly impressed with Neuralink. But the fact is that when you have that much money and that large of a company constantly working towards a goal that will make it profitable, Moore's law decides that it'll get there, right? The law of technology always improving and getting smaller and faster is going to make sure that at some point somebody solves that problem, right? And that's what Neuralink represents. And you're seeing it happen. You're seeing chimps be able to control things on screen. You're seeing pigs, be able to be controlled by it. I mean, this is real.
Yeah. And I just, I wonder if it'll tell you to buy a Tesla. Probably, huh?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When you have an ecosystem of products and one of them manipulates behavior, you can manipulate that behavior into using your entire ecosystem of products, right?
Right. Yeah. And, obviously one of the biggest casualties of all this would be democracy.
Right.
And would be, the total lack of power and ownership among the masses of people. And one thing that decentralized finance does, it works to reverse the flow of ownership, financially and in other ways, ownership of your own personal experience and your data. And I think this is going to be one of the big ones in the next few years, is people are going to want to retain their data and their privacy, and it's funny because, a lot of people are concerned about privacy, but a lot of people don't care anything about privacy. They'll tell you, the government knows that anyway, or they already know that anyway. And, all this time, I remember George Orwell, 1984, all this time we've been kind of like looking like the government was going to be big brother, but it's not like the government, it's industry, it's corporations.
Yeah.
Government, uses it too, but it's corporations,
Right.
And there's a lot of technology now used in law enforcement, not just from tracking, somebody commits a crime in Amarillo, Texas, and they arrest them in Butte, Montana, when they pull up into a gas station. You say, well, how the hell did they know he was going to be Montana? Well, it's not just that they can track your cell phone, but they can use your data and kind of have a pretty good idea where you might go. And when you put it all together, and this happened so many times. A guy was, well, how did they find him? And he gets out the car and they're waiting on him, and because law enforcement is using a lot of this data now, which it's good if you're using it to solve crimes, but if it gets into the wrong hands, I mean, somebody could use it to rob a bank or to manipulate the price of a pound or something.
Yeah.
So I think it a lot of times technology has unintended consequences, and also because data acquisition is done without your knowledge. It's just now, we've been talking about this for years, and just now people are finally realizing that a lot of things that acquire their data and their personal experience use that data to make money and sell it. It's like the Nest thermostat. There's like a microphone in a Nest thermostat.
Right.
Why is that? You can't talk to it, but it can extract the data that it hears you talk about, and I swear to God, I bought a refrigerator not long ago, and I was just talking about it. And all of a sudden on my iPhone, I start getting discount coupons for refrigerators. Now, how the hell did they know I wanted an LG refrigerator? I'll never know. But I got more LG, didn't get too many GE, but data acquisition is become a serious problem. And I think decentralized finance is going to be one way to sort of solve that problem. Decentralized finance, decentralized social media, just a lot of things that are not driven so much by advertising dollars, because one of the things, one of the pitfalls of capitalism is that it's profit motivated. Like one time somebody said, well, what do you think about Don King? They said, man, well, he sure can enhance the bottom line. I'll tell you that. And not whatever else he's done, we're not going to talk about that, but he can sure enhance the bottom line. And I think in a way, that's kind of what capitalism is like. It's why, people, the biggest drug dealer in the world is like a folk hero. You know what I'm saying? Because he made a ton of money. And I think once that becomes the only standard, that a lot of things go by the wayside. Now hopefully, there's still some integrity.
Well, how many people worship Wolf of Wall Street, right? This is a movie that was literally created as subtle satire about major fraud, right? Like astronomical theft of the monetary system and the market. And people who worship this capitalistic idea of immense wealth, of like yachts and partying and like this whole image of what rich looks like, they worship that movie. They don't even understand the irony of the fact that that movie is about a bad guy. Like
he's a crook, man.
It like subtly makes fun of just the caricatures behind this fraud. And it's turned into a cult classic, not because people don't want it to repeat, but because people wish they were in his shoes. And
they think that's how they're supposed to be.
Right.
They aspire to be
success,
that.
Right?
Yeah, they aspire to be that. So I think, surveillance capitalism, data acquisition is something that will have to be regulated, because I think what it does, I think the biggest casualty, like we said before, is democracy.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Well, I guess most people would rather live in a free democracy than a dictatorship. Well, I would imagine there's probably some people who have been led to believe that it might be better to live in a dictatorship.
Well, certainly there's plenty of people who live in dictatorships that have been convinced of that, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people probably wouldn't admit that, right? When you give it that terminology and you say, well, would you rather live in a free democracy or a dictatorship? People are gonna be like, definitely a free democracy. But when it really comes down to it, we've seen time and time again, groups of people band together to support authoritarian regimes and leadership for the sake of conserving what they think is at risk, right? And
Right.
so they're more than willing to give up explicit democracy, perhaps in favor of the idea of democracy,
Mm.
actually in practice of an authoritarian who's promised them that they'll still have freedoms and rights and that they're going to restore their way of life and
Mhm.
protect them. And so that's kind of what's insidious about it, is a lot of it ends up being marketing. It's clever packaging and marketing of authoritarianism that people embrace because they're so terrified of change and they're so terrified of the other, right? This idea, this philosophical idea of the other that's coming to take their jobs and take their way of
Yeah,
life.
they think somebody's going to come and take their money and their way of life. And
Right. And
you
it's
know,
the billionaires. Ironically, this is the craziest thing to me, is like when people stick up for people like Elon Musk and like worship him. And it's like,
Mhm.
you're infinitely closer to being homeless tomorrow than you're ever going to be of having 800 generations worth of wealth in the stock market, right? Like the reality is that they're sticking up for billionaires from a tax perspective for some reason, like that these progressive taxation is going to affect them. But
Now, how much of that do you think is Stockholm syndrome?
I think it's I think it still goes back to that worship, right? It goes back to this like idolization in a capitalistic society where we've been ingrained with marketing for our entire lives to
Mhm.
believe that our products, our glass concrete boxes are like the the definition of what success is, right, in a capitalistic society. And it works. I mean, it's amazing because it works to an extent to make people work hard. But when only a small percentage of people get through, that actually keeps the tension there of maintaining the system, right? It maintains the workforce, it maintains only for so long, but it maintains the system where a few people at the top make a ton of money on the backs of other people.
Mhm.
And those people are okay with it until moments like right now where all of a sudden a lot of people aren't. And
Because they can't make a decent living.
right.
The
Pushes
wages have gotten so low, they
right.
can't feed their family, and inflation, has gotten higher.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's just sad, that people, I heard a gentleman say on a podcast that he said there could be such thing as a good dictator. And the guy says, well, explain. He said, if you had somebody who was a very integrous person and had a lot of integrity and always did the right thing. I say, well, it was, how's that Bible verse? It's easier for a camel to pass through the head of a needle to find an honest man or something like that,
Yeah.
But like you talk about people who actually worship that, that idol worship, I guess. This
Yeah. It's
is,
idolatry of wealth, right?
yeah.
And
And
they're so pumped by it. Like they're so excited for people who have made a lot of money that they're willing to fight their battles, right? Like Elon Musk doesn't have to actually complain about taxes. All of his fans do. I mean, that's the weird thing is like you have a bunch of people right now who are more angry about the people who aren't working than they are about the working conditions.
he got a lot of money from the government to get his business going.
He has billions and
he got $2 billion for the rocket deal, and I think he got almost $3 billion in government subsidies for his electric car.
Yeah, you want to complain about where your taxes go?
Yeah, and he doesn't pay tax, But I'm just saying he says, well, I'm this genius that does all this, but you did that with government help, and I think that's the thing that concerns a lot of people is that once you reach a certain level and you're able to hire lobbyists, you can grease the palms of all the senators and all the Congress people you need, and you can get legislation, you can get things done that a person without the means that you have can never get done. And
right.
And it's sort of I mean, I think to say it's unfair is a gross understatement, but
Right.
I mean, I don't think you couldn't have got a $3 billion loan no matter what you had going, unless you had the influence that he had,
Right.
So a lot of times people say, well, it was innovative and nobody does that by themselves, People say, well,
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos had a great idea. Yeah, but what about the streets that all his trucks tear up? There's like tons of them,
Yep.
on city streets. I mean, that's something that we all pay for. And there are obviously people that work with him. So a lot of times, when people accumulate a lot of money, it's not something that you do by yourself, but it's something you do with help from other people, and many times with help from the government. You
Right.
know, but I think data acquisition is probably going to be regulated pretty soon. And the reason I say that, along with Facebook, is because it seems like the senators and congressmen are finally starting to understand what it is and what it does.
Yep.
And we'll see. We'll see. I know Facebook's under the gun right now. Because people have found it out. A lot of the young women are committing suicide because of Instagram.
Right.
What they don't understand is that a lot of those Instagram models, they don't really look like that. I mean, because they have so many filters now. They got filters that can make you look any way you want to look. And a lot of you can put a body on you. They can put face on you. They can put hair on you. They can make you look any way you want to look. And I think a lot of the young ladies are saying, well, God, I can never look like that. Well, I might as well just kill myself, and this has actually been happening. And Facebook, who owns Instagram, actually knows about this.
Right.
So I think, it's really getting children pretty twisted. And now that's become a problem for them.
Yeah.
So where do you see this going, Alex? I mean,
Well, unfortunately, where it's going with Facebook is that they're working on ways to extend that influence, right? I mean, the thing is that we're actively building things that can be owned by the people. We're actively building parts of the metaverse where you own your materials, you own your data, you carry it around from site to site or platform to platform. And if Facebook succeeds in what they've already accomplished with Web 2, and they are able to accomplish that in Web 3, with the help of regulators, mind you, because ultimately Facebook and regulation are in similar camps in terms of how they think about decentralization, right? They think about it in terms of like, well, how do we control this? And so this is ultimately the corruption of the political system, is that they will almost always have at least overlap in terms of what their agendas are with corporate America. And so where I see it going is that I see Facebook establishing their own integrations in the metaverse. They're going to most likely release some sort of token or tokenization of things. They'll most likely have NFT marketplaces. They'll most likely continue to extend all of their family of apps into the decentralized world using some form of currency or some sort of protocol that others can even build on. I mean, you saw how when Facebook started rolling out certain advertising and they had pages for businesses. And I remember one of my first jobs was actually building like marketplace tabs in those pages that would keep people in Facebook while they were still able to actually actively purchase things through the UI. And so you could develop on Facebook. And I have no doubt that they'll continue to think like that in terms of how they share data with advertisers, how APIs work, how you can develop on their platforms. Half the web now is using React, which is JavaScript, but they're using React, which was made by Facebook. Every day, my job, I write code using a library that Facebook made. It's open source. We know that it's like safe code. It's actually pretty much owned by the community at this point, but that's the level, that's where their tentacles are, right? In every aspect of our digital lives. And as our digital lives blur more with the physical world,
as they move to Web3, because I've always felt that Facebook really wants to own the internet.
Right.
And as they move to Web3, which is a more sophisticated internet, would you say that's a pretty good description? Or a different?
Well, Web3 is essentially just the virtualization of real life, right? Web3 is it's the decentralized web mixed with 3D virtual reality mixed with financial instruments. I mean, it's essentially the next iteration of the web where it's more decentralized, but more integrated, right?
Mhm.
A blurrier line between physical and digital.
But that's kind of where the internet is going to, right? I mean,
Right.
And I wonder how many decision makers, elected officials, understand the metaverse. So it's almost like Facebook is staying one step ahead of them.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is more than one step. A lot of most
Now they're
lawmakers
they're just getting the whole thing is surveillance capitalism thing, and he's on to the metaverse.
Right. They're still stuck on Web 1, where they're like, Web 1 was essentially just, I made an HTML page and I put static information on it. And Web 2 was this dynamic idea of the web, right? You suddenly have accounts and you have data being transferred. And this is where things like Facebook grew, right? The Web 2 grew into essentially an advertising platform, a human behavior platform.
Okay.
Now Web 3 is the extension of that into 3D spaces and virtual reality and the blurring of those lines. And our regulators are still on Web 1, right? They don't understand this progress at all. So
yeah.
So, but it's up to, for those of us who do understand, it's up to us to kind of take a stand against that and
educate people. I mean, that's one of the things we try to do on the show is, educate people. I know when we were, last year, early last year, we were talking about surveillance capitalism, and people were like, well, what the hell is that? It's the acquisition of your data, your personal experiences data, and the monetization of that without your knowledge, and everybody was like, well, I don't believe that. That doesn't happen. And now that's what they're talking about. Right. So I don't know. I kind of see Facebook and a lot of, and I don't know if it's because people are so uninformed or ill-informed, or if it's because a lot of these tech companies are so far ahead of the general masses and the decision makers. It was a time, I think, when our decision makers kind of stayed on top of a lot of things, but it's really hard to really understand this stuff if you don't really kind of make a conscious effort to understand it, and I think
there's a lot of subjects that have become more complex in the modern era. And there's a lot of them, right? There's no lawmaker that only has to worry about just surveillance capitalism, right? They have to worry about 5G infrastructure, and they have to worry about, how buildings are being 3D printed, and they have to worry about medical advancements and pharmaceuticals. And you know what I mean? Like, you think about every category that has regulation associated with protecting us from the dangers of it, and our regulators or lawmakers, I'm not sticking up for them, but the reality is that that's a lot of subjects for them to be so well versed on that they can protect us from all aspects of it in regulation.
That's why you get young, smart people on the payroll that write the laws and that do the research, because they all employ quite a few people.
Right, they have teams. Right.
And I think to kind of keep you informed on everything, and it seems like this whole data piece kind of fell by the wayside. And and maybe it's because people that know a lot about data probably don't like politics too much. So it'd be kind of hard to hire a data scientist if you're a congressperson, maybe. I don't know, but it seems like, they understand a lot of things, but it seems like this kind of got away from them a little bit. So we'll see what happens with that. So, well, that's pretty much our show for today. Alex, you want to say anything in closing in regards to Facebook? I mean, should I buy the stock, sell it, trade it from Meta, or just kind of sit on the sidelines and watch what happens? Huh?
I will say the memes have been quite enjoyable. There's been great ones about feta, where it's just Mark Zuckerberg holding a piece of feta cheese. But yeah, the problem is that so many of these platforms are ubiquitous, right? Like, I have a large audience on Instagram because of my food blog. I have to be there, right? I have family members and friends that I keep in touch with because of Facebook, and it's kind of an extension of my brand. I have to be there, right? And because of the ubiquity of these brands, we're on Facebook Live right now, and that's the reality of the situation. But if we want the next web, if we want things to be different, then
Mhm.
it's not so much taking a stance and refusing to use it right now. It's more about what do we invest our knowledge and our time and our attention into for what's to come. Which DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, do we support? Which tokens do we support? How do we support the Web3 so that that next web can be stronger and better in a decentralized way and not need these centralized companies as much. And they won't have as much power and autonomy to be able to take over our next internet, right? And I think that's key, is like, how do we fight this? Well, we can't necessarily fight it on the front lines by just not participating, right? The reality is that we have to participate, many of us, not everybody. Some people like to live
Yeah,
off.
everybody does. I mean, let's
Yeah.
face it. I mean,
But
if you're not on the internet nowadays, I mean, I don't want to say how can you exist, because it is possible to exist.
Yeah.
But you could probably, you're not able to do a lot of things,
you're anywhere. If you're on Twitter, if you're on LinkedIn, all of
Yeah,
these
yeah.
companies share consortiums with Facebook using Facebook Centra. And so
Google, Gmail,
Google
yeah.
especially. And
Yeah.
so because of Centra and because of Facebook's tentacles being across the entire internet, you either live completely off the grid or you're somehow part of Facebook's ecosystem.
Mhm.
And so, like I said, it's really in terms of like, how do we support the next internet? And that ultimately comes down to educating yourself on what those emerging technologies are and what those new ideas are. And that's why we talk so much about decentralized technologies.
Right. Okay, well, again, if you'd like to reach out to us, it's the DeFi Collective at gmail.com. If there's certain subjects that you would like to see us talk about, let us know. And we're the DeFi Collective on Let's Talk Radio. And you can find us on YouTube and also on Facebook. And please like and subscribe because we try to pass information on it along as soon as we get it. And I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to keep people up to date on this whole data thing and surveillance capitalism and decentralized finance, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. There are a lot of things happening now. And if you had to miss 3 or 4 years going to sleep like Rip Van Winkle, you probably wouldn't have wanted to miss these last 4 since about 2017, because there's so much going on now. And we'll try to, in terms of, the internet, technology, DeFi, we'll try to make you aware of it as soon as we become aware of it. So again, we thank you, my listening friends, for watching. And this is Robert Vaughn and Alex Jewell. Until next week, have a great week.
See you.
Bye-bye.